Hi guys, welcome to Radiant Guidance. Today I'm going to be discussing a much requested topic, which is astrocartography and relocation astrology. So this is the notion that when we travel and relocate and route into a new area, we're essentially shifting the birth chart in a sense. So when you look at your astrocartography maps, like what depending on, all the softwares that show these planetary ley lines, what it's showing is essentially just where planets in the relocated chart fall on angles. Now, the four major angles of the chart are the IC, Imam Cole, which is the fourth house cusp, which is very much like our roots and lineage and ancestry. There's the ascendant, which is the first house cusp, which is how we are perceived and our physical body very much, and how we orient to the world. Then there's the seventh house cusp, the descendant, which would be abbreviated on these graphs as like the DS. I think that's the abbreviation they use. That is the house of relationships and partnerships. And then we have the MC, medium cole, which is the most public angle, which is how we are kind of serving and in the greater public. And it has a lot to do with vocation as well, that specific angle. So when you're navigating astrocartography maps, it's essentially showing you, because it would be way too many lines, right, to show where every planet falls in every house. It's just kind of showing you like an abbreviated version of where planets get emphasized in the chart, meaning they move to one of those four angles. And those very prominent four houses, as an astrologer, those are like the top four reasons people usually reach out for a consultation, either their direction, their where to live, their home and roots, lineage stuff, partnership things, or career, right? So bear this in mind when you're navigating those maps, that you're essentially looking at this, but if you're, especially if you're trying to move somewhere, you want to pull a relocated chart. So a relocated chart is where you enter all the info in to whatever software you use, but you change the location and you, of course, adjust the time as if you were born in that new location. And so this will show you the full picture. You'll notice, if you did this correctly, that say you're wanting to go where Venus falls in the fourth house, which is or on the descendant, which would be a nice place to maybe buy property or feel really at home if you have a strong Venus. So say you're like trying to figure that out. The way you'll know that you did the relocated chart correctly and the time difference correctly is you'll see Venus next to that IC in the fourth house. And then you'll also notice, where did everything else move? Because this isn't one dimensional, right? Like those graphs show us one aspect, but we want to look at the whole chart because there could be important details. Just like no relationship is perfect and like everything's an amazing aspect. Like there's some really good ones, but there's no perfect place, right? So you might go somewhere that's going to feel really homey with Venus in the fourth house, but it might also move Uranus into the 10th house, which might create instability in your work and the way you're showing up in a public way. If you're retired and you don't care about that, then that would be a totally great place, but it also depends. So the second consideration with astrocartography is, what are you trying to focus on or work on? What do you want to be emphasized? Like, what stage of life are you at? Are you looking for a place to like root in and nest? Are you looking for a place more to maybe experience a lot of relationships, or you want to meet business partnerships? You might focus on places where benefic planets fall in the seventh or 10th house. If you're really wanting to like excel and climb the career ladder, where benefics go into the 10th or the 11th house could be good. But the third point is that not every benefic line, like not every Jupiter and Venus line, is one size fits all. You really want to know your chart well or speak to an astrologer because you want to understand if that particular planet that's getting emphasized or that energetic you're working with is strongly placed in your chart. If you have like a stressed out Venus and you're thinking, well, I'll go to where Venus, um, I go to a Venus line. That's like what people will say. If your Venus is stressed out, you might, yeah, it might bring up some of those like issues to work out, but it might not have the exact like effect. So this is why it's not one size fits all. And know know your chart, know which planets are strong in your chart. And the other added thing that I recently discovered talking to a Vedic astrologer was that you can also take into consideration what Mahadasha you're in if you use sidereal Vedic astrology. And there is certain astrocartography software for that. So the point he made was that I kind of was thinking of going to where the sun is on my midheaven, back somewhere east, and he brought up a point that sun lines in a Rahu period might not be the best because those planets aren't necessarily friendly. So this does add another like a nuance, an extra like layer of complexity to it, but it's just things to consider, right? And it's experimental. You can go and travel to places and see what resonates. So I'll just share some both personal, anecdotal experience traveling to and living along many different zones all over the world, and also just feedback from people whose charts I've looked at and have talked to about where they live or have relocated to. So, the first thing I want to say is Pluto. I moved to a Pluto line and I had to go through a deep death and rebirth initiation. Now, did I stay and hang out there? No, I did not because it was a very painful experience for me. I have Mars opposing my natal Pluto, so, and this isn't to like, we're not shying away from self development and like working out these energetics, but it's just to give you the full scope so you're not misguided, right? When you embark upon these adventures. And you could argue, because we don't really fully understand how much fate plays into astrology and life, is that we're fated to have these experiences in these certain locations. And it's just a matter of those right invitations and those right moments to tap into the gifts and medicine that those places might have to offer. Sometimes it's not even going to that place. Sometimes it might be a person who is from that region, which is another really interesting point. Okay, so Pluto lived where Pluto fell on the MC. So Pluto was getting very emphasized. And as you guys probably know, Pluto is the underworld, right? So even this place that I was living, it was called Sandpoint, Idaho. And they had this like frozen lake, and I was there in the winter, and it just had like Scorpio vibes so hard. And my Pluto's in Scorpio. It was a very intense initiation. And one of my astrologers who I was confiding in at the time was saying, if you stay here, you probably should give up the relationship you're in and stay there and like go through this full transmutation. But at that time, I wasn't willing to do that, and I wanted to keep that relationship. So I just forwent staying in that location. And, things worked out how they needed to, but I definitely had the plutonic experience there. I've also traveled to what is called a zone of intensity. Zones of intensity are especially apparent if you have a stellium in your chart, three or more planets in the same sign, same house. You'll find these like zones where there's like a lot of planetary action going on. That was an intense experience for me too. Neutral places are fine, but you might they still change your chart. Like just because something isn't have a line going through it in the map, still look at your relocated chart if you're moving to that area, especially because it's still gonna move. If it's not where you were born, it's still gonna, it's like a dial that's like moving the placement of where planetary energies are like showing up in your in the different houses or areas of life. Now, the other thing I want to mention is it's not replacing your chart, but we can see it as like an overlay or an experiential, a new way of experiencing our chart. So Pluto had my Pluto MC experience. I've lived where I'm born, and I've experienced enjoying that. Again, it's your natal chart. So I had a client who she's drawn to Puerto Rico, and she's actually born there. And I look at her chart. Of course, if I do any relocation astrology, I look at the birth chart first. And I noticed, oh, Venus is in her fourth house, and her Venus is a very strong Venus. And I said, like this seems like you would have a really easy time creating home here. And this is like a very homey place for you. And she was like, I just got that sense. I just felt that this is where I'll end up and like put my roots down and have a family and all that. And it made sense, right? Given that she's born with Venus in the fourth house there. And so when she goes there, Venus is in that placement. So these are just some pointers. I also looked at my friend here on Kauai who he's lived here 35 years. He's from the East Coast and he doesn't even travel to other islands rarely. He barely leaves this place because he loves it so much and it feels so homey. We look at his relocated chart here, Venus in the fourth house. So again, and his Venus isn't like super stressed out and it's not debilitated or anything like that. So this is super fascinating because he just loves it. It just works for him and there's no other place he'd rather be really. So this is something to consider if you're looking for that like really home roots feeling, to go where strong planets fall in the fourth house. Now, I have been on Kauai. I came to Hawaii actually through astrocartography. I was really interested in the line that goes through Big Island. Maui's within that picture, but I originally thought I'd live on Big Island. And I ended up just like living on Maui because I went to all the islands and I decided Maui was my favorite. And this past year, I ended up on Kauai. Beautiful place, love the nature, so peaceful, so tranquil, so rejuvenating, so much healing here. Yet, it was really interesting because I encountered, as soon as I got here, almost immediately, some hostility from people. And um, these were like transplant people, by the way, not local people, but the kind of community that they have going on, I felt really alienated from. And I had a few encounters where I got close to people and it would be a sudden separation, a sudden ending. And it was really painful to have this pattern appear at least 5 times. Like it's a definite pattern. And I'm a pretty self-aware person and I'm not perfect, of course, but I haven't experienced like such a, what's the word? Like preponderance of that specific type of challenge in connection than I did here. As an astrologer, being a person that likes to eat my own medicine, right? I was looking at the astrocartography and I'm like, well, I know I'm like out of the orb of that planetary line, my sun line that goes through, it brings my sun to the ascendant on Big Island, Maui. But when I move up to Kauai, I notice there's another line like intersecting the Pacific Ocean, but within Kauai is like the only island within a 200-mile radius of that, and it's Mars on my descendant in my seventh house. Now, Mars in my particular chart, if you follow Hellenistic astrology, is a uh, greater malefic. So if you're born in the daytime, Mars becomes the more challenging of the two malefics, Mars, Saturn. If you're born in the nighttime, Saturn is the greater malefic. So you could say the severity of those harsh planets gets emphasized depending on day or night chart. And conversely, though, day chart, Saturn becomes more of like the juicy things of Saturn, like the benefits of Saturn, um, pay off more, you could say. So knowing Mars is not well placed in my chart, it's also a day chart. I was like, huh, this is really interesting because Mars, what makes a planet malefic or benefic? It's really if it's separating or excluding, and Mars is known to like separate and sever. So Mars in the house of relationships, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that that would be kind of difficult and challenging. I am a hermit. I do spend a lot of time alone. And here I've gone really deep into my hermitage and I have made friends. But for the most part, I would not say that that is a recommended relocation movement to go to, because ultimately the house of partnerships and connections, this is really important for our mental health, our physical health, our career. Like connections are so important. So ideally you don't want Mars or Saturn in the seventh, moving into the seventh house, especially if you're in a phase of life where, like, if you just want to be a monk and like renounce the world, that's kind of what I've done here. But if you want to, because actually it moved a lot of things into my second house of resources, wealth. So there's always a benefit, right? It's never just one note. Um, but yeah, ideally, like I don't want to be in that orb for too long. Like I would like to be somewhere where I'm like more connected. So I can look at where a lot of the planets go into the 11th, a lot of the I've got Jupiter going into like either the 7th or the 11th. 11th is groups, networks, communities. So these are considerations if you're wanting more connectivity. So again, just to summarize, like it's not one size fits all. There's not one line to go to, right? And if anyone says that, just I would question that. Um, yeah, take into account what's your goals? Like, where are you at? How long are you traveling to this place? How long do you want to maybe live there for? And what is the focus that you want to get out of that place? And a lot of the times people are just intuitively led. Like I had a client who's just intuitive. He's like, I'm going to Vietnam for this training and it's a Pluto on his ascendant and it's going to be all about like he's doing this intensive qigong program and it makes sense. It's like, okay, yeah, he's going there and it's like very plutonic work. And I told him it's Pluto though, like it might be there's a purging, a transformation going on, but he's kind of going there with that particular intention, so it's not a shocker, you know what I mean? So these are just my pointers. This is my 2 cents. If you guys are interested in astrocartography class, I have done this in the past with a group, and you can bring your own charts, your own questions. Comment below or write to me, email me through my website. I will offer that if there's enough interest. And if you want an astrocartography session, you can book through my website as well. Hopefully, these pointers were helpful as you navigate different places in the world. Have a beautiful rest of your day, okay?